Well, hello everyone and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation is really about the gender equality. How do you overcome that pain to fulfill your needs, to fulfill your criteria, to fulfill your dream? Are you a woman out there struggling to meet those needs, struggling to meet your demands, struggling to fit in an organization? Well, my guest today will be telling you just how she's overcome that challenges, those pain to find her joy. My guest is with Dr. Anino Emuwa. She's a banker, entrepreneur, and advocate for gender diversity in leadership. What will be fascinating is that my guest today has 25 years experience of banking, international management consulting, and research. A former corporate banker with Citibank, where she founded the Adverse Consulting, a strategy and financial advisory firm in France. She's an experienced non-executive director and sits on boards of several organizations. She's a member of the Institute of Director Experts Advisory Group on Diversity and Inclusion, a member of the Global Advisory Board of the UK's 21st, and a Grant Advisory Committee member of the Sustainable and Inclusion Digital Financial Service Initiative, supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's an award-winning international speaker on entrepreneurship, emerging technologies, and diversity and inclusion. Anino has been invited to speak at prestigious institutions and conferences around the world. She's an advocate for gender diversity in leadership and has received the Global Award for Women in Tech Alley by Women Tech Network in 2020. She's recognized as one of the top 125 people to follow on LinkedIn about diversity and inclusion. And this is why today's conversation is truly focused on diversity. How do you incorporate that in your workplace? Finally, she's an alumni fellow of Nottingham Business School, where she completed her doctorate in business administration. I can't wait to talk to my guests. And I hope by listening to this conversation, you learn a thing or two about diversity, how if you're a woman, you're looking to get more out of your workplace, what you need to do. If you're an organization, how you can incorporate this into your workplace to help empower gender balance. Meet my wonderful guest, Dr. Anino Emuwa, as she shares her beautiful story and encourages others to inspire and be better. Well, hello everyone and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. As I said in my introduction, today's conversation is truly special. Are you a woman out there and thinking about diversity? How do you get ahead in business? How do you make it work? So many people struggle with this question on, being the best in their own field. My guest today, who I'm really excited to have a conversation with, Dr. Anino Emuwa. She's a banker, she's an entrepreneur, and an advocate for gender diversity in leadership. How are you, Doctor?
And thank you so much. I'm well, and thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here.
I am more delighted to be with you because you focus on a very niche area. I think diversity is something we all talk about, but very few people truly make it work. This is has always been my concern from day one, that we all talk about diversity in the workplace, diversity in getting more women leaders, but we don't know what it truly means. And I think this is why some corporates are still struggling to make this work. Before we get into all of that, who are you?
That's a good start. A little bit about me. Well, I'm the founder of Advertis Consulting, which is a strategy and financial advisory firm in France, here where I live. But I do more than that. I actually am also the founder of Communities of Women in Business Leadership, notably 100 Women at Davos, which is a community that was founded in Davos alongside the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago, and the African CEOs Network.
So when you look back at your life, right, you've achieved so much greatness. What led you on this path to this success?
Part of it was just it just happened, and part of it was planned. That is to say, when I was about 16 or so, I was just interested and fascinated about finance, and I saw it as this resource which you can't see or feel or touch, but yet it drove business. I had a background of maths. Maths was my favorite subject, and perhaps that's the reason why. And so I decided that I wanted to study banking. And at the age of 16, I had, or 17, I was in the first year of my A levels, and we had a project. I was in a boys' school, in boarding school in the UK. This was more than college. And we had a project, economics project, to do something about your career. And at that young age, I went to interview an executive director of a merchant bank in the city of London. And there was, into a taxi with my little file. I was petrified. And I did this interview, wrote it up, and got a prize for this. But it wasn't because I had the confidence, it was just because I had the interest. And so it was from banking and finance that I started. And I studied economics at the LSE, monetary economics, to go into banking and finance. And my career took off in the corporate banking sector. But then I got interested going back to Nigeria in entrepreneurship because I did see that we had a lot of gaps and I couldn't understand why there were certain things that weren't being done when I knew we had the skills and talents. So I began to get interested in entrepreneurship, which I studied when I went back to my MBA at Cranfield School of Management. In addition to continue to being a banker, I started actually studying entrepreneurship academically as well. So that's the story of my early career, shall I say?
I have to ask you this important question because you live in the Western world. You said you're currently based in France. And I'm based in the United Kingdom. One of the things you see with ethnic minority in particular, they're very afraid to take the next level, especially Black women. They think they've reached the peak or they won't have the assets, they won't be given that opportunity. Then in your case, you look at your credential, for example, you've never been afraid to take on challenges, to take on, to talk about, to say, I can do this. Where did you get that confidence in you that as a woman, a Black woman, that these things can be achieved?
Simply from my childhood without realizing it. Because, first of all, I had a mother who was a lawyer and she'd studied to become a lawyer and became a lawyer in the UK in the 60s. So you can imagine that there weren't very many, female lawyers, let alone African female lawyers. In fact, when she came back home to Nigeria in the 50s, actually, in the late 50s, she was the first female lawyer, not in the country, but in her region, which was the western region of the country in those days. And then I studied at Queen's College in Nigeria. And there we were taught to go after anything we wanted. So we left school at the age of 15 or 16 after O levels, because many people, went to another school for A levels or university. And so we didn't see any barriers. So it isn't that we saw barriers and decided that we would overcome them. We actually grew up expected to be lawyers or bankers or accountants, engineers. Two of my closest friends in Europe are engineers from the same school. We didn't see the barriers. And it took very many years to start seeing the barriers and then saying, oh, the reason why women aren't progressing, right, is such and such. And that has really driven what I'm doing now because I then realized that my own particular experience my experience was particular. It wasn't usual. It wasn't normal. And I thought, no, this has to be normal. There shouldn't be anything special about knowing that you can go out and set out to do whatever you want to do. There shouldn't be barriers in your path.
I like that. I like that experience wasn't not if we start thinking it's like normal to as a woman to be ambitious, as a woman to want to achieve more. But you didn't see that, so that helped you along your path to really,
Absolutely.
not see a difference like that. If a boy could, I think growing up, it wasn't really taught that hammered into you that you can't do it, so that made you just feel if mommy's doing it, why
Yes.
can't I? Yeah. I really love that. You answer that really beautifully. And I think other women who are listening will understand that it can be achieved. Another thing about you that I found very fascinating is that you are really a citizen of the world. You've lived in 6 countries and you now reside in France. Having been exposed to different cultures and different lifestyles, different ways of life, what would you say that can be achieved in different way in different countries in terms of gender balance?
This is such an important question because when you live in different countries, and in my case, happily, you tend to adapt without even realizing that you're adapting. And I remember, two of my closest friends in one country, by the time I looked at where they were from, one of them, she was from two different countries, the mother and father, another one, her husband was from another country. When we calculated the countries between ourselves, right, there were about 6 countries and the country we lived in. But at the end of the day, we all wanted the same thing: happiness, opportunity to progress, do what we wanted to do, have our children grow up. And one thing that I felt and I saw keenly, especially working with living in Anglophone and Francophone countries in Africa, was that all that was an artificial division. And really, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all basically want more or less the same things, really. And I think that is what really has driven me. This, being a global citizen is that. And in fact, it's interesting that you use that term because I am an ambassador for the Global Citizen Forum, and there's a summit we're going to in about 10 days' time, and it's all about how, as citizens of the world, we all want the same thing. We don't even have to live in different countries, right? Wherever we live in, right, we are part of the world, so we are all citizens, really, of the world. It doesn't matter the language, it doesn't matter the continent, it doesn't matter male or female, tribe or religion. We are all part of the same world that God created.
That's true. That's true. And it's something that we just have to find in ourselves and see how we can integrate everyone else because we all
Absolutely.
want, even if you're a mother, you want to feed your kid, you all want to achieve the same thing. It's how you get to go about. And I think with your advocacy work, everyone will get to understand that it can be done. It doesn't matter what part of the world you live in, you can achieve it. You have an
Exactly.
impressive academic background and a career CV. Having been a woman of African heritage, right? Has it become easier to engage in a with global audiences because of your African background, where you feel we have sometimes have this can-do attitude, you have to achieve it. A woman has this spirit of I want to give more. Has that been easier for you?
No, but this is a great time, honestly, because I think that many years ago, one you might feel a little bit of that weight, right? Because you felt that you probably had to prove yourself, and even when you did, that you might not have been taken as seriously as a man, or I mean, especially if you're a woman of color, in Europe. But things have changed for the better. But the thing is that very often for women, still thinking about how the past was, right? We may still have been shaped by our experience, but we need to look forward, okay? Not to the past and not even to now. And opportunities are increasingly there for women of color. We are far, far, far away from where it should be, but the direction is positive. And therefore, I encourage any woman listening that, yes, sometimes organizations are not quite sure what to do, but they're more open. And before, you'd get the feeling that the first thing that somebody sees is the fact that you're a woman of color. That's the first thing that they see in the past. And then they listen to you, okay? And then they hear about what you do. But so you almost had to overcome that in their own minds, not in your mind, in their own minds. But it's different now. I actually feel that is actually positive. That when people see me, right, they see me in a positive light. So I even take advantage of it. In fact, sometimes if I need the attention somewhere, in a business front, I feel that would look at me and say, she probably is interesting. But then you better know what it is you have to say as
Absolutely.
well. And so it's seize the moment, ladies, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about the kinds of things that you should do. So do not be frustrated. Do not be overly concerned. Think of it from a positive perspective that things are changing for the better. The world is changing, and we need to seize those opportunities right now.
We're recognized globally for this diversity. And I always ask myself, diversity, we all know, is inclusion and making sure everyone is treated fairly. It doesn't matter what your disadvantage is. If you could be disabled, you could be a woman, you could be a woman of color. But you are very, very vocal about this inclusion. I think your particular focus is the gender diversity in leadership. And that is something that we you look at the chat, for example, you see a lot of gender diversity at the bottom phase. Probably at the second level, you start seeing a little, you still see a little. But when it really gets to the top bits, that's where the scarcity really lies. But your focus is really promoting that gender diversity to move it up the ladder. How can businesses evolve to really start understanding that gender diversity does not just stop on the bottom level, but it needs to move further up?
And honestly, you've mentioned two really critically important things that very often, are missing from the conversation. So one is looking at that progress, right, in terms of diversity, because diversity is about numbers. What percentage of people are drawn from such and such, a social group, and does it reflect the society which that organization draws from? So that's a diversity. So it's a numbers thing, right? But not only just that at the entry level, because very often in bigger companies we see that at the entry level it's not bad. But then what happens? The pipeline or the process through the organization. And that's where the inclusion bit, which you mentioned, comes in. Because you can recruit, but if you do not create the conditions, right, where people feel included or are included, then you would lose them. And that so the organization must be inclusive. And so that is several things. Inclusion is behaviors. So how do we behave to make sure people are included, right? Do we involve them in decision making and listen to the ideas? At the end of the day, having a diverse workforce means the opportunity to have better performance, because having a diverse workforce allows you to capture and encapsulate the whole of that population you're trying to reach anyway in terms of business. So inclusive behaviors are important, how you behave, and make people feel that they're included, hear their voices, include them in decision making. But also the workplace. Is it open to women, for example, or women of color? Is it hostile? Is there some racism that is under the cover that we don't see? Is there unconscious bias towards women progressing? How do you work? How do women, for example, who have children, are they included if they have to take time off work? Do you have leave for fathers as well as mothers? These are all the kinds of things, policies as well. So not just behaviors, but actually policies as well, to allow that diversity to move through the organization. And so we start seeing people from diverse backgrounds, not just gender, sexual orientation, different ethnic groups and religions, all having the opportunity to move up the ladder, because it's better for the organizational performance and for society and economies.
As a woman, right, and you're going into an organization and you notice that this organization, you can do more for it. You are adding value, but you don't see yourself moving up, and you see your other colleagues moving up. What would you say to a woman? What are the top tips to help a woman to go from that bit where she feels, I'm doing so much. I didn't take maternity leave. I probably only took 2 weeks off because I wanted to make sure I'm still here, keeping up with my colleague, but I just don't see that progress added value back to me. What are your top tips to help that woman or help women out there to really progress in that career ladder and get their voice amplified and listened to?
Well, the first thing is prepare, right? So think about it strategically, where you want to go to. Okay, so that's the first thing. So do a kind of a review, right, about your skills, your qualifications, where you want to go to. Then the second thing is that most invariably women are over prepared. We work very hard, we achieve our goals and targets and all of that. But sometimes we forget that when you're moving up into leadership, it's more than that. And very often women expect that their work is recognized. So we do very well at university because university, grades and all of that. But when it comes to moving up, it's a bit different, because some of those skills that are needed, sometimes we feel that doing those things, maybe could be negative. So, for example, networking. There was a research study, for example, that looked at men and women leaders, and said, how much time do you spend in networking at a certain level? And it was surprising to find that it's a huge amount of time. So it's not about just doing the work, people need to, you need to have the right connections, right? You need to know, people within your organization and outside your organization, so networks. You need the mentor, we know about that. You need the sponsor. Who is the person who is going to talk about you behind closed doors and who has the power, right, to basically support your progress. So these are some of the things that we need to do. And sometimes simply, you'll be surprised, simply we just need to ask. You'll be surprised that sometimes we expect to be noticed, sometimes you need to ask. So we need to do some of these things first as well. It may seem unfair, and why does the organization have to be like that? But things are changing, but at the same time, you don't want to hang around waiting for them for things to change before you progress. You want to some tools, right, to use and to progress. So these are a few of the tips. There are more, but these are a few of the tips that I'd like to share now.
I love what you said about university. It's a structure, so we know what to do. We're not to expect. We don't need to do much. Just do your grades, right? Work hard, and you get there. And that's why you see a lot of women succeeding in that sector. When it comes to work, it's more than your grades. It's more than what you do. There's more to it which you need to incorporate into your day to day. And I think it's something really important. And I feel this is where the gaps are with women, is that when we come to work, we think it's about our work that pays the price. But sometimes it's more than that. You need to go out there, network, and figure out who is the person that could speak on your behalf when you're not looking. And this is why I truly encourage people to really listen to this conversation, because what you just touched there is something a lot of women have met. Really, that gap is something they miss out on. And I look back on your academic career, you've achieved extremely, it's just extremely what you've done in your academics life. What's the greatest benefit of some of this being involved in all these academic pursuits in helping you to shape you into who you are today?
You know, I think we all know, when we start out, you have to get the first degree to get a good job. So it's all about you, isn't it?
Mm.
And then, the masters, you want to progress. I was in the banking sector and you needed that MBA to progress, right? So it's all about you, all about progression. But that's where it stopped. When I did my doctorate, for example, I did it for one reason, and that was when I found out living in different countries, right, that entrepreneurs couldn't have access funds. And I said, if that is what is happening to us in Africa, isn't that stunting our development because businesses can't grow? And when I applied to do that, I thought to myself that even if I didn't get in right to a university, I would do that research. So what drove me was no longer about me, but about my bigger vision. So that's what drove me. And then now I'm doing a master's at Cambridge, and it's all about giving back, right? It's about entrepreneurship. It's about a women's leadership, and how do we get women to progress? So on the one hand, at the beginning, it was about your career into banking, economics, and monetary economics, and then the other thing was about making change and about impact. But one thing about academics I can say is that, and the other part for me, which was critically important, was seeing that academic and research many years ago, could be a little bit ivory tower. That means, it's in the academic world, they know about it. Because I read things before the 2008 crisis. I was doing research for my work. And I remember a paper which had nothing to do with what I was doing, but it just came across. And it was somebody writing about the subprime loans. This was 4 years before it happened, and saying that this shouldn't happen because it's going to lead to A, B, C, and D. I remember reading that paper. So that paper was sitting in some research. It was a paper that had been signed off, right, and had been double approved, but it was sitting somewhere and nobody was listening to it. So what's the point of doing research if it's not being used in practice? So part of my work and part of what I wanted to do, and I do, is have a leg in both. So what we're using in the academic world and the research also has value in the business world. So in fact, a lot of our work that we do, we say it is from research, and it's not just from practice, because sometimes practice hasn't really been proven, right? So we make sure that our work is actually backed by research as well.
I like that you're giving back in terms of you're helping the Africans, giving back to them by talking about the entrepreneurship, because a lot of people ignore that phase of life. And this is the gap in when you look at women leaders in Africa, why they women leaders are so successful, but the problem where they fail is that understanding access to finance, understanding how to manage
Yes.
money, understanding the values of what it takes to be a business leader. When you did your research, what did you learn about the African business and how can they really help women to get better access to finance?
You see, one thing, the three things I learned in terms of the barriers. One had to do with the business environment itself, so government policies and things. The other had to do with financial institutions and their understanding of entrepreneurship because they were using practices that were suited to big businesses, not smaller businesses. So that had to change. But also on the terms of on the side of the entrepreneurs, there were skills that they needed had to develop. So my work covered three fronts, even though the main focus had been helping banks to be able to lend to learn how to lend to smaller businesses using different methodologies, right? But also, I found that the smaller businesses themselves needed to acquire certain skills in terms of management, in terms of how do you make a loan request? Sometimes I used to work with clients, right, and they would be asking for the wrong thing, and the bank would just say no. So I'd have to reformulate that request for them, right? And then they'd find out how they could get that loan facility as well. So there are all of these fronts, but then of course the business environment issues and government policies as well that need to be there to be able to support entrepreneurial businesses to thrive as well.
You're a highly sought after international speaker. In fact, when I was looking at your Googling you and I saw all the speaking engagements you do speaking on entrepreneurship, fintech, women leadership. What is the key messages for business leaders out there? So business leaders who are listening right now, what are your key message that they should take on board that will give their business the ultimate chance of success in terms of these key areas we should focus on: entrepreneurship, women in leader, fintech.
Okay, first of all, we're going to an age which is, where we are in the knowledge age and moving into the technology age, right? So we have to embrace, moving into digital technology. It's critically important, for every single business, small or large. So there's technology, right? But then, we are living in a knowledge age, and knowledge is transmitted very often through people. So people and managing people are so critically important. And that's where we need to have that diversity. A lot of organizations sometimes know it, but they don't know how to do it. But it has been shown that there is a big gap in terms of performance with the largest companies who are diverse and those who are less diverse. And it's up to 29% in terms of performance. So these are large gaps. So we need to embrace that diversity because we need talent. The problems of the world in those days when you're managing, it was the manager or the CEO knew everything. But gone are those days. Knowledge is now diffused through everybody. And in fact, the leader is not the person who necessarily has all that knowledge. Actually, it's his or her team, right? And managing people is very different, right, in that kind of scenario. So you also you also need to learn how do we manage into today's world. It's not tops down anymore. So all those, you need your strategy and finance and management and business skills, all the hard skills, but you need to have the soft skills. Like empathy is one of the key ones we've seen through this. Empathy, you need to be adaptable, you need to be dynamic, you need to be able to communicate. So all these soft skills are becoming more and more important for leaders absolutely today. So technology, digital technology, having a diverse and inclusive team and having those soft skills, are probably three of the top ones that I'd like to also mention and highlight to leaders in today's world.
Well, you've talked about mentorship, and I think mentorship is so important because I think mentors teach you. I always say a good mentor teaches you the pain they've gone through and helping you not to go through that same pain and helping you avoid that path of that pain. Why do you think, and women out there, it's so important? Why do you think for them to get good mentors to help them along the way?
Oh, I think so because a mentor is somebody who allows you, who has the experience, right, and is able to sort of reflect on certain things from the outside, things that you might have missed. That's one thing. And then, it's a trusting relationship. So you're able to share because very often it's quite lonely in your position. You don't know who to share with. And so it's somebody who can trust, you can trust in and who can share with you from their experience as well. Also, they have this vast, experience outside. So there might be things, on the outside that, you're not aware of, right? In terms of information, opportunities, and all of that. And so they can help you with that. And it's like having somebody to sort of help you to navigate a path that is uncertain because there is uncertainty, okay, and to have this trusted guide or somebody beside you who can help you along the path, and you can touch base ever so often and discuss ideas and suggestions, and having a mentor is absolutely essential. And building up social capital for women, we need to learn to build up our social capital in the business world, and mentors can really help with that as well.
Before I let you go, Dr. Enuwa, I have to ask you this question because one thing you're really, really good at, you have helped so many people through your charitable platform, where you're part of various organizations which you give back, and your mission is to inspire the next generation of African entrepreneurs to make a difference, to help them understand that what they're doing is actually great, but they're just bringing it out there to the international world. Why is it so important to you to give back to the African world?
You know, I mean, because you see this incredible talent
Yeah.
in Africa, and you know that the talent is equal to any talent in anywhere in the world. But also, I think the biggest opportunity in the world actually is Africa. It's as simple as that. And so, therefore, whatever I can do in order to allow that talent to rise, and also give the opportunity for development in our economies, right? If we have people who have this talent and to embrace this talent, and sometimes there are barriers out there, and people react to it, and that shapes people's decisions, and they limit their ambitions or limit their drive, or because of these things, not sometimes not even realizing them, but to just show them, look, these are paths and these are opportunities, and you can showcase yourself, and you can have access to finance. I'm working with organizations, I can't talk about all of them, but one of them who I guided, and they got into one of the top venture capital schools, programs in the world, right? When I was talking to them about it, it seemed like I said, you need to, and they just came back to me and they were accepted, and there's another one that has raised, significant amount of funding, another one that has grown internationally. These things are all possible. They're not dreams. They are not dreams. They're possibilities.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Enuwa, for joining me, sharing this leadership conversation, and hopefully more businesses will understand the importance of diversity. Any final words before I let you go?
Well, just to say that, the possibilities are there. Yes, sometimes we get tired and exhausted by some of the challenges, but I think that we just need to, for those people listening, especially women of color, entrepreneurs, is really to be positive, really, and to grab the opportunities as they arise. They're there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this. Thank you.